I remember the first time I really thought I knew him. His name was Ryan, and we'd been together for almost 4 years when we got engaged. From the outside, we were the couple everyone envied. I mean, I could write a whole magazine feature on us. Our apartment in Chicago's West Loop, our weekend trips to Lake Michigan, the way he'd remember to bring me coffee exactly how I liked it without me asking. He was funny, charming, and at times unbearably sweet. People would stop me on the street and say, "You two are goals." And I believed it. I thought I was living in the version of love everyone talks about in rom-coms. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't actually know him at all. It started with the little things, little inconsistencies that I shrugged off because, well, who's perfect? He worked long hours at a marketing firm downtown, which I thought was normal. He traveled occasionally for work, which I assumed was part of climbing the corporate ladder. But there were moments that felt off, like the time I noticed him wiping something from his phone screen just a little too quickly when I leaned over his shoulder, or when he laughed in a way that didn't sound familiar, like a voice from another life. I'd catch him spacing out mid-conversation, staring at his phone like he was reading a message he didn't want me to see, and I'd push it down, tell myself I was overthinking things. I mean, he loved me. He was going to marry me. That had to mean something, right? That had to count for something. I was at our favorite coffee shop one Saturday morning, just the two of us before he had to head into work. I remember sitting across from him, sipping my latte, and noticing how he kept checking his watch and glancing toward the door every few minutes. "You okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though there was a knot forming in my stomach. He smiled at me, that perfect, confident smile, and said, Yeah, just thinking about work stuff." But there was a tension in his jaw, and I noticed his hand shaking slightly as he stirred his coffee. I didn't push it. I didn't even ask the follow-up questions that, in hindsight, I should have. I was in love. I thought love was supposed to be trusting blindly. That was when the first real crack appeared. I was scrolling through my Instagram one night when I noticed a tagged post on Ryan's account. It was a picture of him at a party I had never heard about, a party with people I didn't know, in a city I didn't recognize. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a work thing. Maybe it was a friend's birthday. I asked him casually the next day, "Hey, that party you posted last night, what was that?" He hesitated, just a second too long. "Oh, just a work event," he said smoothly. His voice was calm, but there was a flicker in his eyes that made me pause. That flicker set off something in me, a whisper of doubt I couldn't shake, even though I tried. I wanted to believe him, I really did, but the doubt kept gnawing at the edges of my mind, a quiet, insistent voice that wouldn't go away. The next red flag came months later, right around the time we started planning our wedding. I was helping him clean out his apartment. Our apartment, technically, but we kept both of our things separate in his bedroom because he liked his space neat, and I found it. Not on purpose, I swear. I was looking for a book he'd borrowed from me and opened a drawer I hadn't seen before. Inside was a stack of papers, receipts, hotel key cards, business cards for places I didn't recognize. There was a gym membership in a completely different neighborhood, a separate phone bill, and then, tucked under everything, a small notebook. I almost didn't pick it up, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I should have stopped there. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I opened it. The notebook was meticulously organized. Dates, locations, names, brief notes next to each one. At first I thought maybe it was just business stuff, marketing notes, client meetings, but then I saw the names, women's names, not colleagues, women he had dinner with, weekend trips, dinners, flights. Each one had a note next to it, like a little diary entry. Anna, coffee downtown, funny, flirty. Melissa, dinner at the Drake, awkward tension. Samantha, weekend trip, hotel 421. My stomach dropped. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the notebook in my hands, feeling like the world had shifted under me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just felt betrayed and confused. How could he have done this and I never knew? How could I have been so blind for so long? I didn't confront him immediately. I didn't know if I wanted to. I spent days obsessively going through that notebook in secret, piecing together a parallel life I had never even imagined. He had friends I didn't know about, a whole network of people I'd never met. There were addresses for apartments I didn't know existed, clubs and bars he frequented on nights I thought he was working late. I couldn't reconcile the Ryan I knew with the Ryan in that notebook. I kept thinking, maybe it's just a phase, maybe it's harmless. But deep down, I knew it wasn't harmless. It was deliberate. He was hiding an entire world from me, a world where I didn't exist.
The breaking point came when I accidentally ran into him at one of those bars listed in the notebook. I had gone out with friends downtown completely by chance, and there he was, laughing with a group of people I didn't recognize. He looked up, saw me, and for a second I thought he'd run to me, but he didn't. He froze. His face went pale like he had just seen a ghost. I walked over, my heart pounding, and asked him what he was doing there. Work thing, he said, quick, clipped. But the way he avoided my eyes, the way he shifted from foot to foot, it told me everything I needed to know. He had been living this other life right under my nose, and I had been too naive or too trusting to see it. After that night, everything unraveled. I confronted him at home, tears streaming, voice shaking, words spilling out faster than I could catch them. Who are all these women? What is this? How could you hide all this from me? He didn't deny it, not at first. He just sat there, looking small and defeated, like a child caught doing something they knew they shouldn't have. And then the explanations started. Some of them made sense. Work dinners, networking events, but others were deliberate lies. He had been meeting these women privately, lying about his schedule, creating fake stories to cover entire weekends. He had crafted a parallel existence that I didn't even know was possible. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to leave and never look back. But there was a part of me, maybe the part that loved him, maybe the part that wanted to believe in the man I thought I knew, that stayed. I stayed for hours that night, sitting in our apartment, listening to his explanations, trying to make sense of the man I thought I loved. And I realized something terrifying. I didn't recognize him anymore. The man sitting across from me was both the person I had loved and someone completely unknown, and I had to figure out who that person really was before I could even think about moving forward. The following weeks were hell. I became obsessed with his patterns, his habits, the way he answered calls, the tone of his voice.
Every time his phone buzzed, I jumped. Every time he mentioned a work trip, I checked the dates, the locations, the receipts. I found more lies than truths. I found texts on his old email account, messages to women I had never met, sometimes intimate, sometimes just casual, always secret. I felt like I was slowly drowning in this sea of betrayal, unable to pull myself out. And the worst part was the confusion. I couldn't tell if he was cheating because he didn't love me anymore, or because he had always been living this double life. And maybe the scariest thought of all was that I had been blind to it for years. I had ignored the signs because I wanted to believe in us, and now that belief had turned into this hollow, aching void inside me. Friends noticed a change of me. They'd ask, "Are you okay? You seem different." I would lie, smile, say everything was fine. I didn't want anyone to know. Part of me felt ashamed. How could I have loved someone so deeply and yet missed all these signs? How could I have been so oblivious? But then another part of me, the part that was terrified, the part that wanted answers, kept digging. I started going through his bank statements, his credit card bills, piecing together a life I had never known. Flights to New York, hotel stays in Detroit, dinners in parts of Chicago I had never been. It was exhausting, humiliating, heartbreaking, and I couldn't stop. I remember one night sitting on the floor of our bedroom, the notebook spread out in front of me, a pile of receipts and hotel keycards beside it. I cried until my body shook, until my chest ached so much it felt like it might break. And through the tears, I realized something. Ryan had built an entire existence that didn't include me. Not because I wasn't worthy, not because I wasn't enough, but because he needed to live as someone I couldn't see, someone I couldn't touch. And the sheer magnitude of that betrayal, it wasn't just cheating. It was an entire lifetime of lies, and I didn't know if I could ever come back from it. After that night, I stopped pretending. I couldn't. Every glance at Ryan made me sick with a combination of rage and heartbreak, and yet part of me still loved him. Or maybe I just loved the version of him I thought I had loved. I remember the morning after I confronted him for the first time, standing in our kitchen, coffee untouched in my hands, staring at him while he tried to make small talk. He laughed at something I didn't even hear, and I felt my chest tighten like my ribcage was shrinking. I realized then that I didn't know how to coexist with the man in front of me. The Ryan I had planned my life with, wedding, house, maybe kids, wasn't real, and I didn't know who this new Ryan was. I started noticing all the little ways he had compartmentalized his life. He had 2 separate cars, which I always thought were extras or backup vehicles. One had a garage spot, the other parked a few blocks away in a lot I had never visited. I eventually realized the car in the lot wasn't for work. It was for the weekend excursions I'd been uncovering in the notebook. He had a whole schedule that I had never been part of, and it hit me like a punch.
I hadn't just been betrayed, I had been completely excluded from his life for years. Everything we shared, the trips, the apartment, even some weekends, I'd been living in a curated version of his reality, one that left out whole chapters of his life. I tried to get answers. I wanted him to tell me the truth about everything, to strip away the lies and show me who he really was. But every time I asked, his defenses went up. "Do you trust me or not?" he'd say, voice calm, too calm. "I'm telling you everything I can." And I'd look at him, at the man who could smile so easily, act so normal, and yet hide a life from me, and I realized he wasn't going to give me the closure I needed, not fully. And even if he did, I wasn't sure I wanted to know, because every new detail I uncovered felt like another stab to the chest, another proof that the person I had fallen in love with and promised myself to didn't actually exist. One Saturday, I followed him. I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't stop myself. I waited until he left the apartment, taking the car I didn't know about, and I trailed him from a distance. He drove across town, through streets I rarely visited, to a nondescript building in a part of Chicago I had never been. He went inside and stayed there for hours. I didn't follow him in, but I waited outside until he left. When he came back to the car, there was a woman walking alongside him, laughing at something he said, touching his arm in a way I had never seen him touch me in years. My stomach turned, my chest burned, and I couldn't stop the tears as I realized he had entire friendships, entire relationships, entire connections that I wasn't a part of, and probably never would be. That night, I sat in our apartment and didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every corner of the place felt like a lie. Every photo, every memory, every us moment I thought was sacred now felt tainted. I kept thinking about the conversations we had had, the jokes, the nights we spent cuddled on the couch. How many of those moments were genuine, and how many were just a carefully constructed performance to keep me from seeing the life he was really living? I wanted to scream at him, to throw him out, to burn everything down. But I also wanted to understand, to make sense of what I was seeing. The next week, I started to notice patterns in his behavior that I had missed before. Random disappearances, vague explanations for where he had been, little inconsistencies in stories that should have been simple. I found another hidden phone, not just a burner, an entire second smartphone he kept in a drawer. It wasn't just for cheating. It was for another life, another set of communications, another world I wasn't allowed to see. And when I confronted him about it, he didn't deny it. He just shrugged, like it was no big deal, like it was normal to have a second life hidden in your apartment. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I started talking to his coworkers, carefully, without letting him know. At first, they were surprised I was curious, but once I explained, their faces changed. There were subtle acknowledgments, looks exchanged, and then quiet confirmations. Yes, he had been living a double life. Yes, he had relationships that no one knew about. Yes, people had noticed but didn't say anything. It was like everyone knew, except me. The realization was horrifying. I wasn't just betrayed by him. I had been completely isolated from the truth by everyone around him. It was a conspiracy of silence, whether intentional or not, and I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. The worst part wasn't even discovering the hidden life. It was realizing how much I had invested in a man who wasn't real. I had imagined a future with him that never had a chance of existing. I had made decisions, shaped my life, given my heart, my time, my trust to someone who had been living a secret life while I lived mine. And I hated him, but I also hated myself. I hated that I had ignored the red flags, the gut feelings, the little moments of doubt that should have screamed at me. And I hated that even now, I couldn't completely stop loving him. I remember the night I found the hotel receipts.
They were tucked behind a drawer in his dresser. Dates that overlapped with weekends I had thought we spent together. Some were across the country, some in cities we had never visited. I traced each one, tried to make sense of the patterns, and the conclusion was undeniable. He had been running a completely separate life, with multiple women in multiple cities, while I thought we were building a future together. I felt like my entire world had been turned upside down. I didn't just lose a fiancé, I lost the idea of trust, the idea that love could be real without deceit. After that, I stopped asking questions. I couldn't handle any more answers. I didn't confront him directly about everything I knew because I realized he could lie me into submission. And part of me, deep down, wanted him to lie. I wanted him to say it wasn't true. I wanted to believe the man I had loved still existed somewhere beneath the surface of these betrayals. But the reality was worse. He didn't need to lie anymore. His hidden life had been out in the open for months, and he didn't care. The fact that I had discovered it didn't faze him. He just carried on, as if our shared life and his secret life were two completely separate things that could coexist. And they did, until I became aware of it, and then suddenly, everything shattered. I remember the first time I cried in public about it. I was at work, a meeting that went late, and I just broke down. I could feel my coworkers staring, the whispering behind closed doors, and I didn't care. The grief was too much to contain. It wasn't just sadness, it was anger, betrayal, humiliation, disbelief. I felt like the foundation of my life had been ripped out from under me. And the part that made it unbearable was knowing that he had been capable of living with such duplicity for years, and I never would have known if I hadn't stumbled upon the notebook, the receipts, the hidden phone. In those weeks, I started piecing together the magnitude of it all. Not just the cheating, the traveling, the hidden apartments, the secret friendships, the other lives, but the way he had constructed it. The planning, the precision, the casual arrogance of someone who knew I would never suspect. Every smile, every touch, every whispered "I love you" had been part of a performance, a mask he wore flawlessly. And I hated him for it, but I also felt sick with awe in a perverse way at how completely he had managed to deceive me. It wasn't sloppy, it wasn't impulsive, it was deliberate, calculated, and sustained for years. I didn't sleep for nights. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, imagining scenarios, imagining conversations, imagining confrontations that might happen. I would think about the women he had been seeing, the lives he had touched, the experiences he had kept from me, and I would shake with a mix of rage and despair. I wanted him to fall apart, to confess, to beg for forgiveness, but I also knew it would never be enough. Nothing could undo the years of lies. Nothing could fix the fact that I had been completely unaware of the life he had built in parallel to mine. And through it all, I realized something terrifying. I had invested my entire adult life up to that point in a relationship that was a lie. Not just a small lie, not just a betrayal that could be mended, but a full, functioning, carefully constructed alternate reality. And I didn't know if I could ever see him the same way again. I didn't know if I could ever trust anyone. And yet, I couldn't make myself leave. I couldn't bring myself to walk out the door and erase the life I had built with him, because even though it was a lie, it was still my life. And maybe that's what made it so unbearable. The fact that I had to live with someone I loved but didn't know, someone I trusted but couldn't anymore, someone who had destroyed the foundation of everything I believed in. After weeks of sleepless nights and constant mental spiraling, I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that things would go back to normal, but confronting him directly had become almost impossible. Every time I thought about it, my chest would tighten, my hands would shake. I kept imagining his face, that calm, smug expression he would get whenever I asked too many questions. I began to see that he wasn't just a cheater, he was someone who had perfected the art of emotional manipulation. The notebook, the receipts, the hidden phones, they weren't mistakes. They were part of a system he had built to control the narrative, to keep me in a bubble of illusion while he lived a life I would never touch. And the more I realized it, the more furious I became. I started keeping track of him in the most obsessive, irrational way possible. I downloaded apps to see if his location matched his work trips. I stayed up late scanning social media for mentions of him, looking for hints of these secret dinners, secret weekends, secret lives. It became a kind of sick game, like I had no choice but to uncover the full picture before it crushed me completely. And I did find things. Flights he never mentioned, Instagram posts he tagged with friends I didn't know existed, receipts for luxury restaurants I hadn't been to. Every single discovery was a punch to the gut, a reminder that everything I thought I knew about him, about us, was built on lies. And yet, even in the middle of that anger, there was a tiny, sick part of me that couldn't stop loving him. One Thursday night, after another long day of piecing things together, I confronted him again. I had evidence this time, airline tickets for a weekend in Miami, text messages from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. I laid everything on the kitchen table, one by one, watching him watch me, his eyes calm, almost detached. "How long?" I asked, voice trembling. "How long have you been doing this?" He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, and said, "You really want me to tell you everything? You might not like it." I felt a sharp twist in my chest. "I don't care if I like it. I need the truth." He sighed and began, slowly, deliberately, recounting details that made my head spin. Weekends spent in hotels with women I didn't know existed, nights out at bars I had never been to, trips to cities I didn't even realize were part of his itinerary. It wasn't just about sex either. He had cultivated emotional relationships, flirty connections, people he confided in while keeping me in the dark. He even admitted that some of these women thought they were dating him in their own way. And through it all,
He acted as if it were no big deal, as if the rules of honesty and loyalty didn't apply to him. I stared at him, fury and disbelief mixing into something I hadn't felt before. I wanted to hit him, I wanted to cry, I wanted to vanish. That weekend, I did something I hadn't thought I was capable of. I went to one of the places he had been staying, a boutique hotel on the north side of the city. I checked in under a fake name, and I waited. I didn't have a plan. I just wanted to see, to confirm, to feel the reality of what he had been hiding. And there he was, sitting at the hotel bar with a woman, laughing, touching her shoulder in ways he had never touched me in years. I stayed hidden in the shadows, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And I realized then that everything I had suspected was real.
Every fear, every gut feeling, every inkling of doubt I had ever brushed off was true. He had built a life without me. When I confronted him that night in the apartment, the conversation was explosive. Not just yelling, but a raw, guttural anger that I didn't know I could express. How could you do this to me? How could you lie for years? How could you live a life I didn't even know about while pretending to love me? He didn't flinch. He looked at me, calmly, and said, "Because that's the person I am. You knew me for what, 4 years? That's not even a fraction of who I really am." And it hit me. That was the worst part. He didn't feel guilty. He didn't even feel like he had done something wrong. In his mind, he had simply been himself, and I had been naive enough to think that himself included me. After that night, I felt like I was unraveling. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't function. I spent days wandering through the apartment, touching things, looking at photos, wondering how many moments had been real and how many had been staged. I started noticing things I had missed before, little discrepancies in our routines, subtle ways he had manipulated situations to cover tracks. The more I noticed, the more impossible it felt to reconcile the man I loved with the man who had betrayed me so completely. I started having panic attacks. Sometimes I'd be walking down the street, thinking about him, thinking about the secret life, and my chest would tighten, my legs would feel weak, and I'd have to stop and lean against something until the feeling passed. The anxiety was relentless. I felt like my mind was a minefield, one wrong step away from total collapse. And the worst part was that no one really understood. Friends tried to comfort me, but it was impossible for them to comprehend. How could they? I wasn't just dealing with a breakup. I was trying to process the fact that the person I had promised myself to, the person I had planned a life with, had been living a life I didn't even know existed. I started sleeping in the living room one night just to be physically away from him. Even though it was our apartment, even though it was the space we had shared for years, I couldn't bear to be near him. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments in my head, wondering how many of them had been lies, wondering if he had even loved me at all. And part of me couldn't stop thinking about the women he had been seeing. Were they happier? Did they know about me? Did he love them in the way he had tricked me into thinking he loved me? The thoughts consumed me, making me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. One evening, I found myself in our kitchen, holding a bottle of wine I hadn't touched in years, and I just let it all out. The tears, the anger, the betrayal, the fear. I screamed until my voice was raw. I slammed doors, kicked chairs, did everything I shouldn't have done. And through it all, he watched, silently, almost like a scientist observing an experiment. There was no apology, no remorse, just calm, and it made my blood boil in ways I can't even describe. I realized then that I didn't just hate him, I was terrified of him. Not physically, but emotionally. The control he had over my life, the way he had hidden an entire reality from me, was something I had never experienced before, and it left me feeling powerless. I started talking to a therapist, slowly, quietly. I needed someone to help me process the avalanche of betrayal I was facing. I couldn't talk to friends anymore. They didn't understand the depth of it, the surrealness of what I had uncovered. But the therapist listened, really listened, without judgment, and that helped. It helped me start to untangle my emotions from his actions, to start separating my self-worth from the fact that I had been deceived, to recognize that none of this was my fault. And yet the fear lingered. Even as I gained clarity, the image of him living a secret life haunted me. The notebook, the receipts, the secret trips, they weren't just proof of betrayal. They were proof of a man I didn't know, a man I thought I loved who didn't exist. One day, I found another envelope in a drawer. Inside were photos, Polaroids of him with women I didn't know, taken in hotel rooms, at brunches, in parks. It was meticulous, like he was documenting his double life as some kind of twisted archive. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand how someone could do this, how someone could live two completely separate lives, and how I had been oblivious for so long.
I sat on the floor for hours, flipping through the photos, imagining the conversations he had, imagining the moments he had shared with people who weren't me. And every time I closed my eyes, I could see him smiling, laughing, touching them in ways he had never touched me. It was around that time that I realized something else. He wasn't just cheating or lying. He was performing an alternate identity, a life completely unconnected to me, and he had done it so well that I had no idea. And the thing that terrified me most was imagining how many people he had done this to in the past, how many times he had built entire worlds with the people in them knowing. The thought made me nauseous. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus, and yet part of me was addicted to the truth, to uncovering the full scope of the life he had built without me. I started going through his email accounts, his old phone backups, anything I could find without him knowing. It was sick, obsessive, but I couldn't stop, and every new discovery was worse than the last. Every text, every email, every digital footprint painted a picture of a man living a life in parallel to mine, a man capable of deception on a scale I had never imagined. And the worst part was that he wasn't hiding it for financial gain, or for revenge, or even for something tangible. He was doing it because he could, because it was part of who he was, and I had been naive enough to think love, commitment, or promises could matter to someone like that. It was around this time I realized I had to make a choice, continue living in a shared space with a man I didn't know, or leave and try to reclaim my life. But leaving wasn't simple. It wasn't just packing up and walking away. This was my home, my life, the man I had loved for years, the person I had imagined spending my future with, and part of me still loved him even as I hated him. It was confusing, devastating, and utterly consuming. Every day felt like a balancing act between rage and grief, between longing and fear, and I didn't know if I would ever find a way to stop feeling both at once. The final weeks were a blur. I had started packing my things slowly, quietly, trying to leave as little trace as possible. I couldn't face another confrontation where he acted calm, untouchable, like nothing I had uncovered mattered. I would move a box of clothes here, a stack of books there, all the while replaying memories in my head, trying to determine which were real and which were performances. I had started sleeping at a friend's apartment more often, using that distance to breathe, to think, to gather the courage I didn't have in my own home. And yet, even in the quiet of someone else's living room, I could feel him everywhere, in the photos, in the receipts, in the lingering scent on our furniture, in the walls that had witnessed years of his lies.
One night, I found myself standing in our kitchen, staring at the empty space where his coffee machine used to be, and I realized I had memorized every detail of this apartment. I could walk blindfolded from the front door to the bedroom without tripping over anything. And yet, despite knowing every inch of the place, I had no idea who I had been living with. I thought about the dinners he had lied about, the weekends he had fabricated, the women whose laughter had been louder, brighter, more present than mine had ever been. And the realization made me feel small, like my life had been happening on the margins of someone else's reality, without my consent. When I finally decided to leave, I didn't tell him. I couldn't. He didn't deserve that moment of power over me, the satisfaction of watching me crumble or plead or beg for explanations. I packed everything, loaded it into my car, and drove away in the early morning before he woke. The city was quiet, streets empty, and I felt a twisted kind of liberation, even though my chest ached like I had been punched repeatedly. I drove for hours, trying to empty my mind, but it followed me. The notebook, the hidden phones, the women, the lies. I realized that leaving didn't erase the trauma. It didn't undo the years I had invested, the trust I had given, the dreams I had built. But it was a start. It was me reclaiming a fragment of control over a life he had dominated for too long. I moved into a small apartment on the north side of Chicago, somewhere I could start fresh. I didn't put pictures up, I didn't unpack everything. I needed space, mental and emotional space, to figure out who I was outside of him. Friends came over, but I kept them at a careful distance. I wanted support, but I didn't want pity. I started therapy again, more seriously this time, forcing myself to confront every painful detail, every memory, every instance of his deceit. I realized slowly, agonizingly, that the man I had loved and trusted hadn't existed, and I had to grieve him, not just for the betrayal, but for the illusion, for the future that would never be, for the years I had unknowingly surrendered to someone else's secret life. One day, a few weeks after I left, I decided to confront the truth fully. I went back to the apartment to collect the last of my things. Walking through the empty rooms, I felt a combination of dread and determination. Every photo, every object, every trace of him made my stomach churn. I packed methodically. No bursts of anger, no tears this time. I was leaving with the knowledge, the clarity, and the power that he had once held over me. I could see now that the apartment, the city, even the years we had shared weren't what they had seemed. They had been a stage, and I had been a willing actor in someone else's carefully orchestrated narrative. The day I finally drove away for good, I didn't look back. I didn't want to see him, didn't want to catch a glimpse of the life he had forced me to live in ignorance. I felt the weight of years pressing down on me, but I also felt something fragile and precious: freedom. Freedom to rebuild, freedom to trust myself, freedom to exist in a life where the people around me mattered more than the illusions they created. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for a long time: hope. Not hope for him, not hope for love, but hope for me, for the person I could become outside the shadow of his duplicity. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought about him, I felt a wave of nausea, anger, and heartbreak. Sometimes I would drive past places he had taken me, remember conversations, remember the way I used to laugh at his jokes, and the memory would cut like a knife. But I started reclaiming my narrative piece by piece. I went back to work, started socializing again, slowly letting friends in, cautiously rebuilding trust. And I realized that the betrayal had changed me, not broken me, not destroyed me, but transformed me. I had seen the depths of deception, and I had survived it. I had faced the unthinkable truth and made a choice to live, not just exist, in the aftermath. Months later, I stumbled upon one of his old social media accounts, dormant, filled with pictures and posts I had never seen. I didn't react at first, didn't even think about him consciously, but eventually curiosity gnawed at me. I clicked through the photos and felt a cold, distant detachment. There was no anger, no longing, just a strange acknowledgement of the person he had been, and the fact that I had escaped a life I didn't belong in. I realized then that the Ryan I had loved, the man I had trusted, the man I had been engaged to, was gone, probably forever, and that it wasn't my job to reconcile him or understand him anymore. My job was to reclaim myself, my life, and my peace. It took a long time, but I started to date again, cautiously, warily. I didn't rush into anything, didn't let anyone too close, but slowly, painfully, I began to believe in the possibility of love again. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. And I realized that even though Ryan had shattered my world, even though he had built an entire life I had never known about, I had survived. I had seen betrayal on an unimaginable scale and emerged from it alive, more aware, more cautious, and more determined to protect myself. I had learned the hard way that people can hide entire universes, but I could still choose the universe I wanted to live in. Some nights when the apartment is quiet, I think about him. I imagine the life he continues to live, the secrets he keeps, the women he may still deceive, and a part of me still feels the sting, the anger, the grief. But I also feel relief. Relief that I am no longer a part of it. Relief that I discovered the truth. Relief that I can exist fully in a life of my own making. And in that quiet, I sometimes whisper to myself, not as a warning, but as a reminder. I survived someone who had an entire life I never knew about, and I came out stronger. I came out myself. It's funny, sometimes people ask how I managed to leave, how I survived the deception, how I found the strength. And there isn't a simple answer. There's no single moment of triumph. It's been years of small decisions, quiet bravery, and a relentless refusal to let someone else's duplicity define me. It's been nights of crying alone, days of obsessive research, hours spent piecing together a life I didn't know I was part of. But most of all, it's been about reclaiming ownership of my own story, refusing to let a man's secret life erase mine. I don't know if I'll ever truly forget him, and I don't know if I'll ever stop thinking about the life he hid from me. But I do know this: I survived. I learned that trust is fragile, that love can be a performance, and that people can hide universes without anyone knowing. But I also learned that I am stronger than the illusions built around me,
braver than the betrayals I faced, and capable of building a life that isn't dependent on someone else's deceit. I finally understood that no matter how deeply someone betrays you, no matter how hidden their life may be, the one thing they cannot take from you is your own agency, your own resilience, your own story. Leaving Ryan wasn't just walking away from him, it was walking towards myself. Every step away, every mile driven, every tear shed, was a reclamation of my life.
And now, years later, as I sit in my own apartment, surrounded by things I've chosen, in a city that feels like mine, I can look back and understand that the engagement, the apartment, the love, the betrayal, they were all part of a journey I survived. And even though he had an entire life I never knew about, I created one I could call my own.